So please welcome to the stage, Lewis Smith.
Thank you. I'm good, I'm mic'd up. Thank you for the introduction. So I'm Lewis, and I'd like you to imagine that it's March 2017. Think about where you were at that time. Perhaps you were working a job, perhaps you were studying. I remember vividly exactly where I was then. I was 7 years into working a corporate job back in England, when one morning I found myself sat in one of those dull, grey carpeted meeting rooms, soulless meeting rooms, and I had a light bulb moment. It was one of those blink of an eye, everything kind of changed for me moments. And since then, I've not been able to look at life in the same way since. So I'd like to share with you what exactly that moment was today. But first, if I can just start by asking a question of the room to figure out the split here. Who currently already works online and is completely location independent? Hey, freedom. Who isn't yet, but is aiming soon to be? Okay, that's fairly even, actually. Okay, great. Well, 2 years ago, that was me. For those of you that I haven't yet had the pleasure of meeting at last night's drinks, I'm Lewis. And as Luke mentioned, I'm one of the few British people here. Now, you might know us Brits for things like Downton Abbey, or perhaps David Beckham, or in more recent times, Brexit. Now, this brings me on to the reason why I felt the need to so urgently leave the UK back in July. But today I'm going to talk to you about how I left the London 9-to-5 corporate world and transitioned to achieve location independence by starting an e-commerce dropshipping business from scratch with no prior experience and reaching $1 million in turnover within the first 15 months of doing it. So let's go back in time to 8 years ago. It's September 2011, and I was just about to graduate from university. I was sat in my dingy student house. You can all picture what it was like. And on my desk, my phone started to ring. And I answered the call, and it was a call telling me that I was being offered a position on a really prestigious competitive graduate scheme, which I'd just recently interviewed for with a global corporation. Now, as a broke student, I was over the moon with this news. I'd just spent the last 3 years getting myself further and further into the student debt hole. And I'd also been living off that nutritious student diet for the last 3 years of McDonald's and kebabs. I was delighted to accept the role, and 7 years later, I'd worked my way up through that company, through various different positions, and it was great. It was a great experience. I'd learned a lot. It got me some amazing things in life. It got me a house in London. It got me a nice company car, got to travel the world. It was I was doing all the things that everyone around me in that company was doing, but without really questioning anything along the way. I'd always dreamt, after 7 years, I kind of felt, for the first time ever, that I was a little bit lost with it. I was just kind of following the motions. And I could only really put it down to the suppression of an underlying urge for entrepreneurship that was deep down inside, but I didn't quite know how to channel that. I'd always kind of, in the distance, dreamt of being an entrepreneur, but I'd never really given any serious thought as to how you'd make that happen. Looking back, I think I was having what they refer to in the industry as a quarter-life crisis. But one cold, rainy morning in London, I was sat on my sofa in the apartment, and it was about 6 a.m. I was just preparing for the morning run before work. And I was sat on my phone, flicking through the audible.com app, through the audiobook library, looking for some inspiration. And I typed in the search term, entrepreneurship. That, for me, is where it all began. That's where I discovered the holy Bible of entrepreneurship, The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss. So I'm sure, as is the case for many of us here in the room, this book drastically changed my perspective on things. It was a real shift. Prior to that, I'd never really been one for self-development, self-help books. But for the next 6 hours, I found myself, headphones in, pacing around the living room, listening to this book on 2 times speed. So she was talking incredibly quickly about entrepreneurship and how you could set up a location-independent business and live from anywhere in the world while you ran it. And I was immersed in it. I was kind of following it as quick as I could. And in that book, there's a chapter that really stood out to me, and it was about e-commerce. That was the one that resonated with me. And it's a little bit dated, some of the information in there now, but it still stands. And that, for me, is where the YouTube rabbit hole of research then unfolded. From there, I went into full-blown hermit mode for the rest of the day and just followed YouTube-suggested video after video after video and went deeper and deeper into this world of e-commerce entrepreneurship. Needless to say, the well-intentioned 6 a.m. run I had planned for that morning was well and truly cancelled at this point. It's as if someone had shown me behind the curtain as to what life could be like. Anyway, the next day, I was sat in work in this dull, grey carpeted meeting room. And it was at that moment I looked around the room, and this isn't the exact room, this is a stock photo, but it's similar, you get the idea. I realized that I looked around the room and I thought, this is no longer my path. There was a whole world of e-commerce entrepreneurship happening outside of this room, and I couldn't get the thought out of my mind. Why am I not yet involved in it? I've got, it's happening and I'm not there. I didn't have all the answers back then, and I still don't now, but the difference was that suddenly I was willing to learn them, and I felt that the barrier had been removed. Much to the confusion of my colleagues who were with me in that meeting, for the next 3 hours, I couldn't get the smile off my face. I discovered that I suddenly had a whole new energy for life, because now I had this goal that was tangible, and I knew that it would take me to where I wanted to be. And that was the difference. So, when I got home that evening, I faced the daunting task of suppressing my childlike excitement over my newfound life plan and playing it cool in front of my, at the time, fiancée and now wife, who's here today, Becky. The plan was simple. All I had to do was convince Becky that the life plan that she thought she'd wanted up until this moment in time, the secure job as a writer in London with a nice house and a nice car, wasn't all it was cracked up to be. No, I had a new life plan for us. We were going to quit our jobs, move to Thailand, and become digital nomads. So, pretty straightforward plan, I thought at the time. Anyway, after a few weeks of leaving what I like to think were subtle suggestions around the house of using our laptops by the beach and imagine doing yoga at sunset every day, the seeds had well and truly been planted, and now only time would tell if I'd managed to convince her. This is a very real scenario, though, for many of us here, whether it's convincing a partner or family and friends that may not necessarily understand what your dream to go and do is, and they may quite rightly be skeptical about it. And it, for me, was one of the hardest parts about breaking out of that cycle. But once the seeds had been planted, I needed to go and figure out where on earth to start. If I was going to build this business, everything I'd read up until this point about successful entrepreneurs and how they'd built businesses like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs were that they had built it as a side hustle whilst having a full-time income stream, so as to prevent that short-term decision-making being fueled by the drive for immediate profits and return. So it was one thing deciding that you're suddenly going to become an e-commerce entrepreneur, and another thing navigating the world of content out there, about the podcasts and blogs, and there's some amazing material out there, but I found myself reading conflicting information. I was on the Warrior Forum and Facebook groups and taking advice from people that were all kind of following a slightly different business model, so none of it was really stacking up. Now, the world of podcasts and audiobooks is great, but I needed some clear step-by-step guidance as to how to get this done. That's when I found a course called Dropship Lifestyle. For the next few hours, I went into detective mode to figure out whether this thing was a scam or not. For anyone that doesn't know, turns out it's not. It's run by a guy called Anton Kraly, who's very experienced and really offers a step-by-step guidance as to how to set up one of these businesses. It was through those networks that I then came across our very own Johnny's podcast. Not sure where he's gone. And he was a great example of someone who's actually used this type of business model to completely change his life. So there's no way that I could stand here and kind of just unload the information that is required to do this kind of thing. So if you are serious, then I definitely advise checking out that or an equivalent type of course. Use it as your foundation. That one just won the best e-commerce course for 2018 by Shopify, so they're obviously doing something right with it. But the community around this was amazing because it was the first time for me that it ever became real. So much like it might be for you coming to the Nomad Summit here is the first time you actually see the humans behind the computer that are doing the same business model as you. And I can share a few tips, though, to get you started. Now, the first thing to explain is that the method I've followed is known as high-ticket domestic dropshipping. So many of you might already be familiar with the theory behind this, but for those of you that aren't, dropshipping is a form of e-commerce where you have your store or website advertising products for other brands. Customers come to your website and buy their products or buy your products. You then use the funds from the customer and use it to purchase those products from suppliers. Suppliers then fulfill the order directly to the customer. The difference between the product price that you sold it for and bought it for is your profit on the sale. So just important to remember, we use domestic suppliers in this method. So this means that they're in the same country as the target customer demographic that you're targeting. So it just means you can get fast delivery and easy returns if required. So customers aren't waiting 10 to 30, 40 days sometimes to get products through from China. And if they want to return it, they don't have to return it to China. It's not such a big barrier. So the benefits of high-ticket dropshipping. Well, there's higher profit per sale. There's less admin involved for higher profits. And you need a lower conversion rate just to get started. So let me just explain that. For every 100 visitors that you get to your site, say you get one person that buys, that's a conversion rate of 1%, obviously. Now, if you are driving traffic to your website through PPC, say for simplicity's sake, it's $1 per click, that's going to cost you $100 to get one sale. So if you're selling low-value $30 items, then that's going to cost you $100 to make a $30 sale. Not great. If you're selling high-value products, so $1,000 plus, even after that $100 on ad spend, you still probably make a net profit if you've got reasonable margins of around about $250. So that, in a nutshell, is the theory behind high-ticket dropshipping and why it's such a good lifestyle business for people looking to get into e-commerce. So this is a snapshot of a 5-month period last year of the sales made through one of my stores. Remember, these are just the sales figures, but to give you an idea, the average profit margin, as I mentioned, is between about 25 to 35%. So even after all costs, even after your Google ads, your Facebook ads, your VAT taxes, your sales tax, the cost of goods sold, you're still left with a net margin of revenue of about 10 to 15%, depending on how well managed your campaigns are. So you can see how these higher profits per sale give you more room for maneuver as a beginner. If we drill down into a breakdown by month, you can see that over that same time period, this store had £300,000 worth of sales. But if we look at just April alone in isolation, there was 76,000, or 77 if you round it up, £1,000 worth of sales. So that's about $97,000 in a month. But notice the amount of orders. So you'll see these types of revenue screenshots thrown around in retargeting ads from YouTube e-commerce gurus that want you to sign up. But I always look straight to the number of orders when I see this and determine, because this level of revenue often gets reached when you've got like 2, 3, 4, 5,000 orders. Think how much customer service is behind that if you don't have a good system as a beginner in place. It also means that our average order value was about £320, so about $400. Imagine if you set up a store that had an average order value of £1,000 or $1,000. You would achieve the same results as this with just 80 orders over that same time period. So you could have a much lower conversion rate. Or if you had the same number of sales, you'd reach £230,000 in sales with that same number of orders, and probably the same ad spend as well, which, to give you an example, for that month, ad spend on Google Ads was about $2,000. So I know many people who do exactly this month by month. Notice the dips as well on these graphs. I needed to draw attention to this, those days where it doesn't look so rosy. Like any shop or store, we still get our fair share of refunds. It's just one of the beautiful things about dealing with customers. But it's not the end of the world. When the supplier is reasonable and you're in the same country as where you're operating your business and you have a good relationship, as long as the products meet the return criteria, you can just return them. No problem. So that's the theory. But how do you pick what to sell? Well, let me summarize some of the tips I've learned along the way. As they say in internet marketing, the riches are in the niches. That doesn't work, though, when you're British and it's pronounced niche. But needless to say, the point still remains. The thing to remember is that it's easier to serve the demand that exists already than it is to create new demand, as we've heard from both speakers so far today. So the best way we found is to brainstorm ideas. We use a tool called Keywords Everywhere, which is just a Chrome or Firefox plugin. And it just shows you how many times that keyword is searched in your target market. So you can set it to US, UK, wherever you're targeting. We say 10,000 searches a month. That's kind of an arbitrary figure, but I would say that justifies that there's an adequate level of demand. And you can then kind of move your idea onto the next criteria, see if it stacks up. Use Google Shopping. Determine the average price of a product in your niche. If it's over $500 or £500, then great. The higher the better, though. Remember, if you've got a higher order value, you need less overall orders to reach that same revenue. If you're building your business as well to be as passive as possible, try and target the upper middle class demographic. The reason behind this is that they've got disposable income and they're just less concerned about constantly trying to find the cheapest possible deal on the market. Just makes your life slightly easier. Low brand loyalty. Try and think of a market which is not dominated by global brands. So if you're trying to sell into a market where the big players are Nike, Apple, Adidas, and Sony, you're very unlikely to get approved with that level of global vendor, as a beginner especially. So remember, the riches are in the niches. You're much more likely to succeed selling something like surfboards than you are smart TVs or iPhones as a beginner. So try and aim for a market as well that has minimal customer service as well. You don't want to constantly be on the phone if you're just starting out, explaining really technical products to customers all the time. You could do that when you eventually outsource it. It might be a great second business model where you can add value, but to start with, keep life simple. If you can go for a hobby or passion-based niche as well, that's great because there's just so much more content and material that you can market when it's passion-driven. You know, think of the YouTube videos and the podcasts you could do around it. There's so many different channels. Another tip, I mean, there's loads more tips we could go into. Try and figure out a demand, make sure there's enough suppliers. Remember, I would say try and find at least 10 suppliers that you have a chance of getting approved within your niche, because if you are just starting out, chances are you're not going to get approved with all of them. You haven't got that much reputation yet to show them. So try and make sure that you still have a viable business, even if you don't get approved with all vendors. And as well, map pricing, so minimum advertised pricing. This is where the price is set on the products that you sell. This is more applicable for the US market than the UK, as it's not legally enforceable in the UK, so you get a lot of undercutting in the market, but it's another thing that will make life easier for you. And a top tip that I mentioned to someone recently, and they said it really helped them when they were kind of at that early stage of determining what they were going to start selling. Figure out, think of a really top-level descriptor word. So something like blue or large or metal, and put it into Google Shopping. Then on the price filter, just push your minimum price up to $500 or $1,000, and you'll be greeted with this weird and wonderful list of large blue metallic items that cost over £1,000 that you possibly never heard of, but might meet all the criteria. And you can think, well, that could be a viable niche. Move it on to the next criteria. So once you've set up and established what niche you're going to target, the next thing is to start building your business. Now, the e-commerce platform that the Dropship Lifestyle course suggests using is Shopify, and you can see why. As a beginner, it's extremely intuitive to use. Now, yes, it's not the most technologically adaptable platform, but if this is your first venture, it's just worth keeping things easy. They've got a great solution here. Choose one theme. So you get a theme that comes free with the course, which is really good. You can just use their free theme. Also, Shoptimized and Turbo by Out of the Sandbox are just two that I could think of at the top of my head, which are both optimized for conversion rates, which is important in e-commerce, obviously, but also for page speed, which is a big ranking factor. Then it's time to start building out your demo store. So this is to build up a store so that you've got a credible business to start contacting suppliers with. Now, you might not be able to get any products when you first start. Some people load existing brands and then remove them. One way we did it was actually load products from AliExpress or Alibaba that meet your niche. And then once you've got other brands live, you can just remove those products because you're not selling them from China. So that's an alternative to get you started. Remember, you want the business to look as professional as possible. So try to go easy on the whole spammy, gimmicky pop-ups that might appear on the website, because you're not selling impulse buy $10 items from AliExpress with this model. The buying cycle of people that are buying products £1,000 plus or $1,000 plus is more frequently longer. So you will probably see some of your conversions, it says the customer visited 10 to 15 times over the course of 30 days before they finally pulled the trigger and made that purchase. So if you're just plastering your site with fake urgency and order today or it goes up and they come back and see, you just start to erode your credibility with customers. The next step, bear with me, is signing suppliers. So we talk about domestic suppliers for two reasons: the faster shipping and the easy returns. If you can deal directly with the manufacturer, that's great. The manufacturer might not always be in the same country as where you're selling to, so you might have to deal with an official importer or distributor, which is okay too, but the more middlemen you introduce in that process, the lower your margin will be ultimately. The best way that I've found to check for competitors within your niche is find websites that are selling the same product as you, take their registered business address and then put it into Google Street View, see where they're operating from. When it pops up, maybe a residential address, you might think, okay, they're operating that business from a house, yet they're advertising all these huge products. Chances are their suppliers are dropshipping for them already, which is great because once you've found that, it validates your market is dropship friendly. So these suppliers are already doing this. You don't have to do the hard work of convincing them. You can then just extract that list of suppliers from all of your competitors that you find that are already dropshipping and start to contact them. Now, I would encourage you to, if you're going to do this, do something that I didn't do from the outset. It seems simple. Someone told me it recently. I was like, that could have saved me months of headache. So it's just the parts we covered, rank your suppliers by their search volume. So for example, if I was thinking I'm going to onboard Nike, I'd check in the US, Nike have 1 million searches a month. If I also found Adidas, they might only have 800,000 a month. Now remember, it's obvious for these big brands, but you don't know this market that you're about to enter very well. So use the data to tell you which the big suppliers are, and then you know who to contact. We contact suppliers, and I know it's painful, but we do it by phone. And we do it just because the success rate is higher. If you just send out emails to suppliers saying, we want an account, they probably get 10, 15 a day, that it's just so much easier for them to ignore them. So there's no better way, well, there is a better way than the phone, and it's in person, but as a digital nomad, that can be quite tricky sometimes. So try and get them on the phone. Once you eventually have an account with them, you get their price list through, you can just upload it to your website and begin advertising their products on your site. Then it's time to start driving traffic. So how do you do that? Well, we use very simple, compared to some of the funnels we've heard about or are going to hear about, this is child's play, this is real basic stuff. But we basically set up a Google shopping campaign, or Bing shopping campaign. Yes, we use Bing. A large percentage of the sales do come from Bing. And these are the photo ads that appear at the top of Google. Importantly, they only appear, though, or they should only appear for commercial intent search queries. So I've typed in buy surfboard at the top, as if I'm a surfing customer, and that's when that ad was shown to me. And so you get quite targeted traffic from this, that are people that are definitely interested in your product. From there, you drive them directly to your product page on your website. From there, they buy and everything's great. But the percentage that don't buy from you, we then retarget them on Facebook, on the Google Display Network, and through email through a service called Klaviyo. So the only way, so that makes the most of every single visitor that comes to your website, because you can drive them all back to your site and ensure that you're making the most of every pound or dollar you've spent. You've got to be careful with this, though, because it's a balancing act. You must know your ad spend numbers. You need to know your revenue over ad spend, or your return on ad spend, or your ROAS, as they call it, to ensure that you're that you remain profitable within your business. You need to know what you can afford to bid and how much traffic you can drive at what price to ensure you remain profitable and in business. It does get complicated, especially when you've got brands with different margins. So it's where a lot of people slip up in this business model, and I'd really advise getting a coach or a mentor or following some training to ensure that you get started, because it can be the make or break of your business. The next thing then, once you're set up, you're driving traffic, you're starting to get a few sales, this is a great scalable business model. So how do you prepare it to scale right from the beginning? Well, the first thing you need to do is you've got to do the things yourself. You've got to get into a routine of making those incremental gains every day on your website, chipping away at those monotonous tasks until you can eventually outsource or first automate the repeatable tasks and then outsource anything else that isn't repeatable. We have a system for, so things like uploading products, optimizing your site for conversions, answering customer calls. These are all things that you should gain personal experience doing in first, because then you will know how to outsource that and create a system for virtual assistants or a team of virtual assistants to eventually take the reins and allow you to go back to working on your business and not in it. The day I decided to build a team was the day I got back control of working on my business and growing it. When I first started, I was doing absolutely everything myself. I was in the car on the phone to customers. The next minute I was on the phone to suppliers trying to negotiate better margins. Then I was on the phone to Google Ads trying to figure out how our pixel wasn't working for dynamic remarketing. Then I was on chat to Facebook. You're doing absolutely everything. You're wearing all the hats. But once you can build that team, suddenly you get back perspective on your business. So if anyone hasn't already listened to the Empire Flippers podcast, it's really good. I'd probably recommend listening to the whole thing right the way through, because there's so much good content in there. But the 2 episodes that, if you're at the point of thinking outsourcing would bring a benefit to your business, I'd recommend episodes 9 and 62. I used onlinejobs.ph and Upwork to hire the virtual assistants. And you've got to make your job posts stand out. You can't have it as like just another virtual assistant required, basic salary. You've got to really make it like this is your chance to join a growing, exciting, successful startup, and you can be part of it right at the inception. We're looking for an amazing virtual assistant to, you get the idea. So one useful tip that I learned from Empire Flippers in one of these podcasts, which is really good, they call it planting an Easter egg. Some of you might be familiar with it, but during the job spec, we now, when I'm writing the bullet points, it will be something like, please include a copy of your CV, a copy of your cover letter, and a photo of a purple giraffe. And it sounds random, and people are like, what? But that 90% of people miss the purple giraffe request because it's kind of hidden in the bullet points. And so that immediately separates the people that paid attention to the job spec and those that didn't. You haven't got a whole HR department to vet these for you. It's all just bombarded at you. So you can just swipe, swipe, swipe until you eventually find one that followed it. What we then do is interview the candidate, and we'll eventually hire those that reach the final stages on a trial shift. So a paid trial shift, but just for a day. Figure out how we work together. And we use a piece of software called Hubstaff, which allows the team to log in and track their own time. It also allows you to track and benchmark activity levels, so see kind of what's happening, what tasks are being worked on, and it also allows you to automate payment as well, so it's really much easier. There's a similar thing within Upwork, but obviously you don't pay the Upwork fee if you're paying them directly, so you can use something like Hubstaff. So that's nearly it, but there's a few final things that I would recommend you add to your e-commerce toolkit if you're thinking of getting started. The first, Boomerang for Gmail. Who already uses Boomerang for Gmail, just out of interest? Okay, yeah, there's a fair few. So this is a great tool, and it allows you to schedule reminders for following up on an email. So if you have written an email to someone and you think they're probably not going to get back to me and I need a way of remembering this, you can have that email reappear back in your inbox like 5 days later. So you're like, yep, they didn't get back to me. And you can set all kinds of weird and wonderful things with it. And there's also a great thing that you can do where you can schedule the delivery of emails, which is perfect for people working across different time zones. So if you're in camp, co-working space down the road at 2 in the morning working on writing emails to suppliers or customers, you can have those emails delivered at 9 a.m. on their time. So it looks like you're there and in the office at the time that they are. We also use Google Drive, so this is pretty basic, but this has been a game changer. Just get everything in one place, have all your documents, all your pricing and margins files. And perhaps most importantly, all of your SOPs can be in Google Drive as well. So when I say SOPs or standard operating procedures, I do everything through video. So I just record a screencast with really slow narration over the top, and I just take the team through exactly what I would like to be done. They can then just watch this video back again and again, and it just provides constant training. And once you have that folder of SOPs, when you then decide to maybe duplicate your business into a different market and hire a new team, or if someone leaves you and you hire a new VA, it's like having your own automated onboarding HR department just there ready to teach them everything they need to know. In the early stages of my business, I used to have a desk with to-do list, and then on top of that, I'd have another to-do list for the to-do list, and then I'd have a to-do list for the to-do list, and it was ridiculous. Eventually, I discovered Trello, and now everything I need to be done within the business goes in Trello under the appropriate category. Then it's assigned to a member of the team. So you just put a member of the team who's responsible for that task on the particular Trello card, and you can set up a date as well. Deadline, exactly. So you can schedule it, make sure nothing ever gets missed. We use Slack for daily communication as well, which is basically just messenger file sharing service. And an interesting one that someone recently told me about, which I think was quite cool, is called Epic Privacy Browser. I think it's quite a small company, but it's a good piece of software where if you need to use a VPN, for example, to see the Google shopping results in the US, but you're in Thailand at the time, and you need to know what it would look like for your customer, usually you have to change your IP address and go through a proxy, and that can cause problems with PayPal and Shopify. If you're constantly flicking between Thailand and the US, it's going to raise risk levels on your account. This just is like a VPN within a browser, so it's completely isolated, and it's really good. You can just use that as your VPN window, change your IP address completely free. So yeah, I'd recommend that. So that really was a whistle-stop tour of the technical side. But how do you know when it's time to go full-time? Well, much like this guy, I don't think I ever really knew when it was time to make that leap and go full-time. So I was like that excited puppy, just constantly thinking I was ready, but never quite going for it. In March of 2018, I got married and had been dropping hints, as I mentioned earlier, for some time about, wouldn't it be great to just go and run this business from somewhere like, I don't know, Chiang Mai, Thailand? One morning in our London apartment, Becky, my wife, turned to me and said, why don't we just go for it and move to Thailand after the wedding? It's now or never. I couldn't quite believe my ears when I heard this. I was like, this must be a time-sensitive offer, and it could be retracted. It could be retracted at any moment. So I snapped it up before she could retract it and said, yep, we're doing it. So over the next few months, we resigned from our jobs, sold all of our stuff to our friends in a hilarious auction-style cocktail party where we had all of our friends round to our flat, and then we drunkenly auctioned off our belongings. We sold everything that evening, from the clock on our wall to our vacuum cleaner. We gathered up the rest of it and we sold it all on eBay until we were just left with these 4 suitcases to take with us around the world. I always remember the look of confusion on the faces of friends, family, and colleagues over what we were planning on doing with our lives at this stage. But eventually, we just booked our flights, packed up our laptops, and left the UK 7 months ago now. And we haven't looked back since. So I don't usually share the whole sales screenshot on Shopify thing because it only tells half the story, as you know. But this one was different because it meant something. Now, it wasn't our best sales day by any stretch, but we were walking down the jetty to board the plane to Thailand from London to make that permanent move. And we were both looking at each other like, oh God, are we about to make a huge mistake? And suddenly I just glanced down at my phone and just saw these notifications lined up. And it was like someone was watching down on us, being like, giving us the nod, being like, you're making the right move. So in summary, the method that I followed is high-ticket dropshipping. Now, whilst you don't have to follow this, there are many viable methods, obviously. It is a proven one, and I can personally say it's given many people who I know and me the ability to be our own bosses. If you treat it like a business, it will pay you like a business. If you treat it like a hobby, then it will only pay you like a hobby. Remember, you're building an asset. So as we just heard, these stores are assets that can sell for upwards of 20 to 30 times the monthly net profit, depending on circumstances within your business. So a store making just $2,000 a month might sell for $60,000. The fast track, though, to getting this right is to find a mentor or follow a course who has made the mistakes for you and put the concise actions into place, because trust me, it can be an expensive and arduous way to do it the other way around. And build and scale whilst you aim to automate everything that you can and then outsource the rest. Remove yourself as the bottleneck. So as is always the case, the 80-20 still applies within this business model. 20% of the suppliers that you get on board will account for 80% of your sales on average. 20% of the products that you have on your site will make up 80% of your conversions. And 20% of the things you do will make 80% of the difference. So before I close, and I'll be happy to take any questions, I hope I've been able to capture the moment that I first realized that this was real and not just something that other people on the internet did. These are some of the great people that I've met since leaving the UK and moving to Chiang Mai, and it's opened up my mind as to life outside of my comfort zone. I hope that some of us here in the room have that exact same moment of realization that I had on that grey, cold morning in London. And I can't wait to hear what you went on to do about it at next year's Nomad Summit. So please feel free to reach out to me. My contact details are here on the screen. Or come and say hi to my wife, Becky, or I, who'll be here. You can't miss us. We'll be the two pasty British people, being overly sarcastic, no doubt, and drinking English breakfast tea by the pool. Thanks very much for listening.
Thanks, Lewis.
Lewis, thanks very much. That was fascinating. There's something that kind of bothers me a little bit about dropshipping. I'm not in dropshipping myself, but when I meet, say, a freelancer here, they'll quickly tell me what service they offer. When I meet a podcaster, they'll tell me what they podcast about. A blogger will tell me what they blog about. When I meet a dropshipper, they're very hesitant to tell me what niche they're in.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious as to why. I'm guessing it's because of competition, but does that mean that dropshipping might be a bit more fragile? You need to be more careful?
Yeah, it is a good point. It's one of the most frustrating things because I'd love to be able to just be like, this is what I sell, it's great, but obviously doing that